For 15 years, a millionaire has learned to live with the silence left by his daughter's disappearance. But everything changes when a new maid arrives at his house and plays a melody on the piano that only he and his daughter knew. This sound awakens buried questions and a past that refuses to remain hidden. Watch this beautiful story to the end, it will be worth it. If this story interested you, subscribe to our channel, don't forget to like this video and tell us which city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. The grand piano stood like a silent guardian in the corner of Alexander Bennett's mansion, its polished surface reflecting the dim evening light. For 15 years, that piano had remained untouched, a monument to a past that refused to fade. Alexander himself couldn't bear to look at it most days, let alone hear its music. But tonight was different. As he pushed open the heavy oak doors of his mansion, exhausted from another endless day of meetings and acquisitions, an impossible sound stopped him in his tracks. Piano notes, delicate and haunting, floated through the air. But it wasn't just any melody. It was their melody, the one he had composed with his daughter Emily during those precious moments when she would sit beside him on the piano bench, her small fingers trying to mimic his movements on the keys. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Nobody knew that melody. It had never been written down, never shared with anyone outside of those intimate father-daughter moments. Yet here it was, drifting through his home like a ghost from the past. With trembling steps, Alexander moved toward the music room. His heart thundered in his chest, each beat synchronized with the familiar progression of notes. As he approached the doorway, he caught sight of the pianist, Sarah Miller, the new housekeeper Mrs. Thompson had hired just 2 weeks ago. She sat at the piano with an almost trance-like expression, her fingers dancing across the keys with the familiarity of someone who had played this piece 1,000 times before. Her long brown hair fell forward, partially obscuring her face, but there was something in her posture, in the way she swayed slightly with the music, that sent a jolt of recognition through Alexander's body. "Stop," he commanded, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's hands froze above the keys, and the final notes hung in the air between them like suspended crystals. Slowly, she turned to face him, and for a brief moment, Alexander saw something flicker in her eyes, fear, recognition, he couldn't be sure. "Mr. Bennett, I'm so sorry," she stammered, quickly rising from the bench. "I know I shouldn't be touching the piano. It won't happen again." "The melody," Alexander said, taking a step closer. "Where did you learn it?" Sarah's hands twisted together nervously. She was young, probably in her early 20s, with delicate features that seemed to hold shadows of someone he once knew. I've always known it," she replied softly. "For as long as I can remember." "That's impossible." Alexander's voice cracked. "I composed that piece myself. No one else knows it. No one except..." He couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't say her name. Sarah's face paled slightly. "I don't know how to explain it, sir. The melody just lives in my head. Sometimes I hear it in my dreams." She paused, seeming to struggle with something internal. "When I saw the piano here, I couldn't resist playing it. It felt like coming home." Alexander studied her face intently, noting details he'd somehow missed before. The slight tilt of her head when she spoke, the way her right hand unconsciously moved to touch her left wrist, exactly where Emily used to wear her favorite pink ribbon. "How long have you been playing piano?" he asked, fighting to keep his voice steady. "The woman who raised me had an old upright piano," Sarah explained. "She said I was drawn to it from the moment I arrived at her house. I must have been about 8 or 9 at the time." 8 or 9. The numbers hit Alexander like physical blows. Emily had been 8 when she disappeared. "And before that," he pressed, "what about your childhood before living with this woman?" Sarah's expression clouded over. I don't remember much from before. There was an accident, they told me. Head trauma, the memories never came back." Alexander gripped the doorframe for support, his world spinning. Could it be possible? After all these years of searching, of hoping against hope, could his daughter have somehow found her way back to him? The rational part of his mind The part that had built his business empire warned him not to jump to conclusions. But as he watched Sarah gather her cleaning supplies, preparing to leave the room, he couldn't ignore the way she moved, the familiar grace that reminded him so much of his wife, Emily's mother. "Wait," he called out as she reached the door. Would you play it again?" Sarah hesitated, then nodded, setting down her cleaning supplies and returning to the piano. As the first notes filled the room, Alexander closed his eyes, letting the memories wash over him. He could almost see Emily sitting there, her small feet dangling from the bench, her laughter mixing with the music. When he opened his eyes again, he found Sarah watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. In the fading light of the evening, with her hands poised over the keys, she looked so much like Catherine, Emily's mother, that it took his breath away. "That's enough for today," he said abruptly, turning away to hide the emotion on his face. "You can go home now, Sarah." As her footsteps faded down the hallway, Alexander remained in the music room, staring at the piano. After 15 years of silence, it had finally spoken again, and its message had shattered every certainty in his carefully ordered world. Alexander spent the entire night in his study, surrounded by old photographs and newspaper clippings. His fingers traced the edges of a particular photo. Emily on her 8th birthday, wearing her favorite pink ribbon, sitting at the very same piano where Sarah had played just hours before. The similarity in their postures was uncanny, almost as if the two images could be superimposed perfectly over one another. Morning found him still at his desk, his coffee long cold, when Mrs. Thompson knocked on the door. The elderly housekeeper had been with the family for over 30 years, one of the few constants in his life before and after Emily's disappearance. "You haven't slept," she observed, her tone carrying the familiar mix of concern and reproach. "Clara," he said, using her first name as he rarely did. "Tell me about Sarah, everything you know." Mrs. Thompson's expression shifted subtly. "There isn't much to tell, sir. She came highly recommended by the agency. All her references checked out. She's quiet, efficient, conscientious." "That's not what I mean," Alexander interrupted. "Tell me about her background, her family, where she came from." The housekeeper hesitated, smoothing her apron with practiced hands. She was raised by an elderly woman in a small village called Millbrook, about 3 hours from here. The woman, Margaret Hayes, I believe, found her when she was very young. There was some sort of accident and the child had no memory of her life before that. Alexander's heart rate quickened. "An accident? When exactly?" "I'm not entirely sure of the exact date, but..." Mrs. Thompson's voice trailed off as she noticed the scattered photographs on his desk. Her eyes widened slightly. "Mr. Bennett, surely you don't think..." "She played the melody last night, Clara. Emily's melody." Twaida. Color drained from Mrs. Thompson's face. She knew the significance of that particular piece of music. She had been there during those precious moments when father and daughter created it together. "But that's impossible," she whispered. "No one else knows that melody. Unless..." She looked at the photo on his desk, then back at him. "Have you noticed how she sometimes tilts her head when she's thinking, just like Catherine used to do?" Alexander finished. "Yes, I noticed." Mrs. Thompson sank into one of the leather chairs facing his desk. "What are you going to do?" "I've already made some calls. I have people looking into Margaret Hayes and the village of Millbrook, and I've arranged for some DNA testing, discreet of course. We'll need something with her DNA on it." "Her coffee mug from breakfast," Mrs. Thompson suggested. "I haven't cleared it away yet." Alexander nodded, grateful for her quick understanding. "There's something else, Clara. I need you to watch her. Notice her habits, her mannerisms, anything that might remind me of Emily," she finished softly. "I already have, sir. The way she hums while she works, how she always starts. Cleaning a room from the left corner, her preference for strawberry jam at breakfast, all just like Emily." Alexander stood and walked to the window, watching as the morning sun cast long shadows across his manicured gardens. Somewhere in those gardens, 15 years ago, His daughter had vanished without a trace. Only her pink ribbon remained, found, near the very piano that had now brought this mystery to his doorstep. "Sir," Mrs. Thompson said hesitantly, if Sarah is really Emily, why wouldn't she remember us? And more importantly, who brought her here? Why now?" These were the questions that had kept him awake all night. If Sarah was indeed Emily, her appearance couldn't be a coincidence. Someone had orchestrated this, but to what end? "I don't know," he admitted, "but I intend to find out." As if on cue, they heard the soft melody drifting up from downstairs. Sarah was at the piano again, playing that same haunting tune. Alexander and Mrs. Thompson exchanged glances, both recognizing the additional flourish at the end of the phrase, a small improvisation that Emily had added to their composition, insisting it made the music smile. "Keep this between us for now," Alexander instructed. "We need to be careful. If someone arranged for her to be here, they must be watching. We can't risk frightening them away before we have answers." Mrs. Thompson nodded and quietly left the study. Alexander returned to his desk, pulling out a fresh sheet of paper. He began making a list of everyone who might have had a motive 15 years ago: business rivals, disgruntled employees, jealous competitors. At the top of the list, he wrote a name he hadn't allowed himself to think about in years: Victoria Blackwood, his former business partner. The melody from downstairs faded into silence, replaced by the soft sound of Sarah's footsteps moving through the house, unconsciously following the exact path that Emily used to take during her morning routine. Alexander added another note to his list: "Find Margaret Hayes. The woman who had raised Sarah might hold the key to unraveling this mystery, assuming she was still alive to tell her tale." The next morning, Alexander sat in his home office, staring at a plain manila envelope. Inside were the preliminary DNA test results that had the power to either confirm his wildest hopes or crush them entirely. His hand trembled slightly as he broke the seal. The words on the page blurred before his eyes, but one phrase stood out in stark clarity: 99.9% probability of paternal relationship. He closed his eyes, letting the weight of the confirmation wash over him. Sarah was Emily. His daughter had come home. But with this revelation came a torrent of questions. Who had taken her? Why had they returned her now in this way? And most importantly, what should he do with this information? Lost in thought, he almost missed the soft knock at his door. It was Sarah, carrying a silver tray with his morning coffee. "Come in," he called out, quickly sliding the DNA results into his desk drawer. He watched as she moved around his office with practiced ease, setting down the tray exactly where he preferred it, arranging the cup and saucer with unconscious precision, just as Mrs. Thompson had always taught Emily to do. "Will there be anything else, Mr. Bennett?" she asked, and for the first time, he truly heard the familiar cadence in her voice, the slight lilt that had been Catherine's signature. "Actually, yes," he said, making a split-second decision. "Would you mind sitting for a moment? I'd like to ask you something." Sarah hesitated, then perched tentatively on the edge of one of the leather chairs. Alexander noticed how she automatically smoothed her skirt as she sat, another one of Catherine's gestures. "You mentioned yesterday that you were raised by a woman in Millbrook," he began carefully. "Margaret Hayes, is that correct?" Sarah nodded, her fingers unconsciously playing with the hem of her sleeve. "Yes, though she passed away recently, just before I came to work here, actually." Alexander leaned forward slightly. "I'm sorry to hear that. She must have been very special to you." "She was," Sarah replied, a shadow crossing her face. "She was all I had. When she found me, I was, well, I don't remember much from before. Just fragments, really. Dreams, sometimes." "What kind of dreams?" Sarah's brow furrowed in concentration. "They're usually unclear. There's music, always music, and sometimes I see a garden with roses, and I'm wearing something pink. But then it gets confusing. There's rain and someone is calling my name, but it doesn't sound like Sarah. I can never quite hear what they're saying." Alexander's heart clenched. The rose garden had been Catherine's pride and joy, and it had been raining the day Emily disappeared. "Have you ever tried to find out more about your past?" he asked, keeping his voice steady. "Margaret discouraged it," Sarah admitted. "She said it would only bring pain, that I should focus on the future instead. But lately," she trailed off, looking uncertain. "Lately what?" "Lately, I've been having this strange feeling, like I've been here before, not just in this house, but in this life. The piano, the gardens, even the way the light falls through these windows in the morning, it all feels so familiar." She shook her head. "I'm sorry, I'm not making any sense." "No, you're making perfect sense," Alexander assured her. He wanted nothing more than to tell her everything right then, to bridge the 15-year gap between them with 3 simple words. "You're my daughter." But he knew he couldn't. Not yet. If someone had orchestrated her return, they might be watching, waiting. One wrong move could send her running, or worse. "There's something else," Sarah said hesitantly. After she was gone, I found some old papers in her house. Most of them had been burned, but there was one fragment that survived. It had a name on it, Victoria Blackwood. Alexander fought to keep his expression neutral, even as his pulse quickened. Victoria, his former business partner, the woman who had left his company after a bitter legal battle just months before Emily's disappearance. "Did the name mean anything to you?" he asked carefully. "No, but..." Sarah frowned. "The strange thing is, the paper disappeared the next day. I'm sure I put it in my drawer, but when I went to look for it again, it was gone, almost as if someone had taken it." Alexander's mind raced. Someone was clearly still pulling strings, still trying to control the narrative. But who? And why? Had they allowed Sarah to find that particular piece of information? "Mr. Bennett," Sarah's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Is everything all right?" He managed to smile. "Yes, of course. Thank you for sharing this with me. And Sarah, if you ever want to talk more about your past or those dreams, my door is always open." After she left, Alexander pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. When the other end picked up, he spoke without preamble. "James, I need everything you can find on Victoria Blackwood's whereabouts for the past 15 years, and I mean everything." As he hung up, his eyes fell on a small photograph partially hidden behind others on his desk. It showed Victoria at a company party 15 years ago, her arm linked with his. They were both smiling, but her eyes held something he hadn't noticed at the time, a cold calculation that now sent chills down his spine. Victoria Blackwood stood at her office window, 40 stories above Manhattan, watching the city lights flicker to life in the gathering dusk. Her phone buzzed with a message she'd been expecting. "He's looking into you." A smile played at the corners of her mouth as she typed back a single word. "Good." Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Well, almost everything. Margaret Hayes wasn't supposed to leave those papers where Sarah could find them, but that small deviation could be turned to their advantage. Let Alexander chase his ghosts. The truth was far more complex than he could imagine. Meanwhile, back at the Bennett mansion, Sarah was in the garden, pruning roses in the fading light. Her hands moved with instinctive knowledge, knowing exactly how to cut each stem, which branches needed to be trimmed back. She hadn't been trained for this task. She just knew, as if the knowledge was encoded in her DNA. Mrs. Thompson watched from an upstairs window, her heart aching at the familiar sight. It was exactly how Catherine used to spend her evenings, with Emily always by her side, learning the art of tending roses. The girl had inherited her mother's gift for gardening, just as she'd inherited her musical talent. The housekeeper's reverie was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Alexander appeared beside her, following her gaze to the garden below. "She's a natural with the roses," Mrs. Thompson observed softly. Just like both of them," Alexander finished. "I've heard from my investigators about Margaret Hayes." Mrs. Thompson turned to face him. "And?" "She didn't die naturally." His voice was tight with controlled anger. "Someone made it look like a heart attack, but there were irregularities. Too many irregularities to be coincidence." "Dear God," Mrs. Thompson whispered. "Do you think she..." Was silenced? Yes. The question is, why now? Why not years ago? Alexander ran a hand through his graying hair. She must have known something important enough to keep hidden all these years. But what changed? Below in the garden, Sarah had finished with the roses and was now sitting on the old stone bench near the fountain. She'd pulled out a small notebook and was writing something, her face bearing the same look of concentration that Catherine used to have when composing music. "There's more," Alexander continued. "Victoria Blackwood has been busy these past 15 years. She's built her own empire, mostly in Europe and Asia. But here's the interesting part. She's been making regular trips to Millbrook, at least twice a year every year since Emily disappeared, to check on Sarah. That's my guess, but why? What's her endgame?" He pulled out his phone and showed Mrs. Thompson a series of photographs. They showed Victoria at various locations in Millbrook over the years, always from a distance, always trying to be discreet. In every one of these photos, Alexander pointed out, she's with this man. He zoomed in on a figure in the background, tall, distinguished-looking with silver hair. "Do you recognize him?" Mrs. Thompson squinted at the image, then gasped. That's Dr. Richards, but he moved. Fell away right after Emily disappeared," Alexander finished grimly. "He was our family doctor. He knew everything about us, including Emily's unique blood type and her medical history." A soft melody drifted up from the garden, interrupting their conversation. Sarah had moved to the small garden pavilion where a baby grand piano stood, protected from the elements. It was Catherine's favorite spot to compose, surrounded by her beloved roses. "Listen," Mrs. Thompson said suddenly, "that's not the same melody as before." Alexander closed his eyes, letting the notes wash over him. "No, it's not. This is something Catherine wrote, something she never finished. She was working on it the week before she—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Catherine's passing had come so suddenly, just 3 years before Emily's disappearance. "A car accident," they'd said. "A tragic accident on a rainy night." But now, watching Sarah play his late wife's unfinished composition, a piece that had never been written down, that existed only in Catherine's memory, Alexander felt the foundations of everything he'd believed begin to crumble. "Clara," he said slowly, "I need you to pull out all of Catherine's old medical records, and I want to know everything about that accident. Everything." Mrs. Thompson nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You think they're connected? Catherine's accident and Emily's disappearance?" "I think," Alexander said, watching as Sarah continued to play the haunting, unfinished melody, "that we've only scratched the surface of what really happened 15 years ago." In the garden below, Sarah suddenly stopped playing, her hands frozen above the keys. She turned and looked up at the window where they stood, as if sensing their presence. For a moment in the gathering darkness, her silhouette against the piano was exactly like Catherine's had been on that last evening, before the rain began to fall. The following morning, Alexander found himself in Dr. Richards' old medical office, now occupied by another physician. The current owner had been surprisingly cooperative when Alexander explained his interest in the old records, especially after seeing the number of zeros on the check he'd written. "Everything from before 2010 is in these boxes," the office manager explained, gesturing to a stack of dusty storage containers. "Dr. Richards left them when he sold the practice, said they were too old to be relevant." But Alexander knew better. Relevance wasn't measured in years, it was measured in secrets. He sifted through the files. A pattern began to emerge. Catherine's medical records showed regular visits in the months leading up to her accident, all documented in Dr. Richards's precise handwriting. But the nature of these visits was oddly vague. Routine checkup, follow-up consultation, general wellness visit. Then he found it, a single sheet of paper partially obscured between 2 larger files. It was a laboratory report, dated just 2 weeks before Catherine's accident. The medical terminology was complex, but one phrase stood out: genetic marker anomaly consistent with previous findings. Alexander's phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. It was a text from Mrs. Thompson. "Sarah found something in the attic. Come home immediately." When he arrived at the mansion 20 minutes later, he found Mrs. Thompson and Sarah in the vast attic space, surrounded by old boxes and sheet-covered furniture. Sarah was holding what appeared to be an old journal, its leather cover cracked with age. "I was cleaning up here," Sarah explained, her voice slightly shaky, "and I found this hidden behind one of the trunks." She held out the journal. It's filled with music and something else." Alexander took the journal, immediately recognizing Catherine's elegant handwriting. The pages were filled with musical notation, but between the staves were notes written in a code he and Catherine had developed during their college days, a private language they'd created for passing notes in class. "This was my wife's," he said softly, watching Sarah's reaction carefully. "Your wife?" Sarah's voice trailed off. "The woman in the portrait downstairs? The one with the roses?" Alexander nodded. He began to decode the hidden messages, his heart racing as the words took shape. "Victoria knows. Must protect Emily. The genetic marker can't be hidden forever. Richard says there's no other way, meeting him tonight." The entry was dated the day of Catherine's accident. "There's something else," Mrs. Thompson interjected, holding out a small envelope that had fallen from between the journal's pages. Inside was a key and a torn piece of paper with an address in Millbrook, Margaret Hayes's address. Sarah stared at the address, her face pale. "But how? Why would your wife have Margaret's address? She found me years after." Alexander watched as the questions formed in Sarah's mind, seeing the first cracks appear in the carefully constructed wall between her past and present. He wanted to tell her everything right then, but a lifetime of business negotiations had taught him the value of timing. Push too hard, too fast, and people retreat. Sometimes the truth needs to be discovered rather than told. "Sarah," he said gently, "would you be willing to help me with something? I'd like to decode the rest of this journal, but some of these musical notations are complex. Given your talent with the piano?" "Of course," she replied quickly, seemingly grateful for the distraction from her unsettling questions. "Should we start now?" They moved to the music room where Sarah sat at the piano while Alexander placed the journal on the music stand. As she began to play the written notes, he translated the coded messages between them. Hours passed as they worked together, father and daughter unknowingly recreating the same dynamic they'd shared 15 years ago. The journal's contents painted a disturbing picture. Catherine had discovered something about Emily, about genetics, about Victoria Blackwood's true motives. The entries became increasingly urgent in the days leading up to her accident. The final entry was incomplete, ending mid-sentence. "If anything happens to me, the truth is, in the rose garden," Sarah suddenly said, her hands still on the keys. "I don't know why, but I feel like the answer has something to do with the rose garden." Alexander looked at her sharply. "What makes you say that?" "These dreams I've been having. There's always roses. And a woman, your wife, I realize now. She's telling me something important. She's pointing to a specific rose bush, but I can never quite see which one." Just then, Mrs. Thompson burst into the room, her face ashen. "Sir, you need to see this. Victoria Blackwood has just arrived at the front gate." Alexander's mind raced. After 15 years of calculated distance, why would Victoria choose this moment to appear? "Unless, Sarah," he said quickly, "would you please go help Mrs. Thompson prepare some tea? I'll handle our unexpected guest." As Sarah left the room, Alexander quickly photographed the journal's pages with his phone and slipped the small key from the envelope into his pocket. Whatever game Victoria was playing, he needed to be prepared. Through the music room window, he watched Victoria's sleek black car glide up the driveway. In the passenger seat, barely visible through the tinted windows, sat Dr. Richards. Victoria. Blackwood hadn't changed much in 15 years. Her steel grey hair was still perfectly styled, her designer suit impeccable, her smile as artificial as ever. She stood in Alexander's study as if she owned it, while Dr. Richards lingered near. The door, his distinguished appearance somewhat diminished by an obvious nervousness. "Hello, Alex," Victoria said smoothly. "It's been far too long." Not long enough, Alexander replied, remaining seated behind his desk. What brings you here, Victoria? Can't old friends pay a visit? She moved to the window, looking out at the rose garden. I see you've maintained Catherine's roses beautifully. She would have appreciated that. The casual mention of his late wife's name made Alexander's jaw clench. We both know you're not here for gardening tips. No, Victoria agreed, turning to face him. I'm here because you've been asking questions about Margaret Hayes, about the past, questions that might be better left unanswered. For whom? Alexander challenged. You, Dr. Richards? Or perhaps for whoever arranged Margaret's convenient heart attack? Dr. Richards flinched visibly, but Victoria's expression remained unchanged. Margaret Hayes lived a long, full life. Her passing was entirely natural. Like Catherine's car accident. For the first time, Victoria's composure flickered. That was a tragedy, nothing more. Was it? Alexander stood, moving around his desk. Because Catherine's journal suggests otherwise. She knew something, didn't she? Something about Emily, about you, about whatever you and Richards were doing. Journal? Now it was Victoria's turn to look unsettled. What journal? Before Alexander could respond, they heard the sound of piano music drifting up from downstairs. Sarah was playing again, Catherine's unfinished composition. Victoria went very still. So it's true, she's returned. Did you think I wouldn't figure it out? Alexander demanded. The DNA test confirmed it. Sarah is Emily. DNA, Victoria scoffed. Such a simple way of looking at things. Did you never wonder why Catherine spent so much time with Dr. Richards in those final months? Why she was so desperate to protect Emily? From what? Not from what, Alex. From whom? Victoria's smile turned cold. Emily was special. Catherine knew it. She had the same genetic marker, a very rare, very valuable anomaly, one that certain organizations would pay a fortune to study. What are you talking about? Dr. Richards finally spoke up, his voice trembling slightly. The marker affects memory formation and cognitive processing. It creates extraordinary abilities, perfect recall, enhanced learning capabilities, natural affinity for complex patterns like music and mathematics. Catherine had it. Emily inherited it. And you wanted to what? Study her? Experiment on her? Alexander felt sick. We wanted to protect her, Victoria insisted. Catherine didn't understand. The organizations tracking the marker were getting close. They would have found Emily eventually. We did what we had to do. By kidnapping her. By erasing her memories. By giving her a new life, a safe life, Victoria corrected. Margaret Hayes was trusted. She understood the importance of keeping Emily, Sarah, away from those who would exploit her abilities. And Catherine, did she understand when you arranged her accident? Victoria's face hardened. Catherine made her choice. She was going. To expose everything, risk everything we'd worked for. We couldn't allow that. The piano music stopped abruptly. In the sudden silence, they heard footsteps on the stairs. Sir? Sarah's voice called out. Mrs. Thompson asked me to bring up the tea. Just a moment, Alexander called back, his mind racing. He couldn't let Sarah walk into this situation unprepared. But Victoria was already moving toward the door. It's time for a reunion, don't you think? After all, Sarah deserves to know who was really behind her adoption, who really orchestrated her return. Victoria, Dr. Richards warned, this isn't the plan. Plans change, she replied coldly. Margaret's death changed everything. We need to adapt. Alexander stepped between Victoria and the door. You're not going near her. You can't stop what's already in motion, Alex, Victoria said. Sarah's memories are already starting to surface. The music, the roses, Catherine's markers are reactivating. Soon she'll remember everything, including what really happened the night Catherine tried to take her away. The door opened before Alexander could respond. Sarah stood in the doorway, a tea tray in her hands, her eyes widening as she took in the scene before her. Sarah, Victoria smiled. Or should I say, Emily? We have so much to talk about. Sarah's hands began to tremble, the teacups rattling slightly on their saucers. I know you, she whispered. From my dreams. You were there the night of the rain. You were in the garden with Her eyes darted to Dr. Richards, and the tea tray slipped from her grasp, crashing to the floor. The sound of shattering china seemed to trigger something in Sarah's mind. She staggered backward, pressing her hands to her temples as fragments of memory exploded behind her eyes. Rain, thunder, the scent of wet roses. A woman's voice, Catherine's voice, urgent and frightened. "Run, Emily, run to the garden house." Victoria's face, illuminated by lightning, speaking into a phone. "She's trying to take her, stop them." Dr. Richards approaching through the rose bushes with something in his hand. A syringe. "No," Sarah gasped, stumbling further back into the hallway. "No, no, no." Alexander moved to steady her, but Victoria was faster. "Let the memories. Come, Emily, it's time you remembered everything." "Stop calling me that," Sarah's voice was desperate. I'm Sarah Hayes. Margaret raised me. She found me." "Margaret protected you," Victoria corrected. "Just as we planned. Just as your mother should have allowed us to do." "My mother?" Sarah's eyes found the portrait of Catherine on the wall, and another memory surfaced. Sitting at the piano together, Catherine teaching her the special melody, whispering, "This is our secret song, Emily. If we ever get separated, this will help us find each other again." Alexander watched helplessly as his daughter's world unraveled. He wanted to shield her from these brutal revelations, but he knew that would only serve Victoria's purposes. The truth, however painful, was their only weapon now. "Sarah," he said gently, "whatever they tell you, remember, you found your way back here. You played that melody. You knew the roses. Your mother's unfinished song. It lives in your memory. Those aren't implanted memories or coincidences. They're who you are." Dr. Richards stepped forward, his professional demeanor asserting itself. "The genetic marker makes her memories uniquely resilient. We couldn't erase them completely, only suppress them. But now they're resurfacing faster than anticipated. She needs to be stabilized." "Stabilized?" Alexander's voice was dangerous. "You mean drugged, hidden away again?" "Protected," Victoria insisted. "The organizations tracking the marker are still out there. They've already made one attempt. Why do you think Margaret really died? They found her. They would have found Emily next if we hadn't intervened." Sarah's eyes snapped up. "What do you mean, intervened?" "We arranged your employment here," Victoria admitted. "It was the safest place for you. Hidden in plain sight, protected by Alexander's security, close to people who could watch over you. Margaret understood. It was part of our contingency plan." "Margaret knew," Sarah's voice broke. "She knew who?" "I was all along. She knew you needed protection," Dr. Richards said softly. "She loved you like a daughter, Emily. That part was real." "Stop calling me Emily!" Sarah screamed, and suddenly the room seemed to spin. More memories were breaking through. Margaret teaching her to bake cookies, just like Catherine used to do. Margaret watching her play piano, tears in her eyes, whispering to someone on the phone, "She's playing Catherine's songs again. What should I do?" Alexander saw his daughter swaying and moved to support her, but she held up a hand to stop him. Don't touch me. I need to think." She turned and ran down the hallway, her footsteps echoing through the mansion. They all knew where she was heading, to the garden, to the roses, to the place where everything had changed 15 years ago. "Let her go," Victoria said as Alexander moved to follow. "The memories are flooding back now. Nothing can stop them." "Like nothing could stop you from arranging Catherine's accident." Alexander's voice was ice. "Did Margaret discover that truth too? Is that why she really died?" Victoria's face remained impassive, but Dr. Richards flinched again. "Catherine's death was unfortunate," Victoria said carefully, "but necessary. She was going to expose everything, the marker, the research, the organizations hunting for it. She would have destroyed decades of work, put Emily at even greater risk." "You didn't care about protecting Emily," Alexander snarled. "You wanted to study her, experiment on her, control her abilities. That's what Catherine discovered, isn't it? That's what was in her journal." Speaking of the journal, Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Where is it?" Before Alexander could respond, Mrs. Thompson's voice rang out from the doorway. "Sir, come quickly. Sarah's found something in the rose garden. Through the study window, they could see Sarah kneeling beside Catherine's favorite rosebush, her hands digging frantically in the soil. Even from this distance, they could see that she'd uncovered something, a small metal box buried years ago among the roses. Victoria's composed mask finally cracked. "No," she whispered. "That's impossible. We searched those gardens for months. There was nothing there." "Nothing you could find," Alexander said, sudden understanding dawning. But Sarah remembered, just like she remembered the melody, just like she remembered the roses. Catherine left her clues that only her daughter could follow. He turned and ran for the garden, knowing that whatever was in that box could change everything. Behind him, he heard Victoria's sharp command to Dr. Richards, "Stop them. Use whatever means necessary." But Alexander knew they were already too late. The truth, buried for 15 years among Catherine's roses, was finally coming to light. The metal box was small, no larger than a hardcover book, but its weight spoke of secrets too heavy to measure. Sarah's hands trembled as she lifted it from its earthen vault, soil falling away to reveal an intricate rose pattern etched into the lid. Alexander reached the garden just as she was examining the lock. It was a simple thing, almost delicate, the kind of lock that appeared on jewelry boxes and diaries. Without hesitation, he pulled out the key they'd found in Catherine's journal. "Here," he said softly, holding it out to her. "I think your mother meant for you to open it." Sarah looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "She was trying to protect me, wasn't she? Not them, not Victoria." "Yes." Alexander knelt beside her in the dirt, not caring about his expensive suit. "Catherine would have done anything to keep you safe. She tried to warn us, tried to leave us the truth, but they stopped her," Sarah finished, taking the key with shaking fingers. "I remember now. That night in the rain. She was trying to get me away from them. She said they weren't what they seemed, that the protection they offered was really a prison." The key slid into the lock with a soft click. Behind them, they could hear Victoria and Dr. Richards approaching through the garden. Their footsteps hurried on the gravel path. Inside the box lay a USB drive, several folded documents, and a letter addressed to "My dearest Emily." But it was the photograph on top that caught their attention. A picture of Catherine in what appeared to be a laboratory, standing next to a younger Victoria Blackwood. They were both smiling, but Catherine was holding up a piece of paper with a barely visible message written on it. "Help. Don't open those documents," Victoria called out, her voice sharp with authority. "Emily, you don't understand what's at stake here." "I understand that you killed my mother," Sarah replied, her voice stronger now. "I remember her trying to call for help that night. I remember Dr. Richards with the syringe. I remember you giving the orders." "We did what was necessary," Victoria insisted, reaching them. "Catherine was brilliant, but she was naive. She didn't understand the forces we were protecting you from." Forces like these. Alexander had been quickly scanning the documents from the box. Research proposals, experiment protocols, funding agreements with private military contractors. You weren't protecting Emily from anyone. You were grooming her for your own experiments. Dr. Richards stepped forward, his face pale. "It wasn't like that. The marker. It could have changed everything. Enhanced human cognition, perfect memory, accelerated learning. Think of the possibilities." "I am thinking of them." Sarah stood, clutching the box to her chest. "I'm thinking of how you and Victoria spent years experimenting on children with the marker. That's what Mother discovered, isn't it? That's what these documents prove." Victoria's composed facade finally shattered. "We were trying to help them to develop their abilities, to turn them into weapons," Alexander cut in, holding up one of the contracts. "That's what these military agreements are about. You wanted to create some kind of enhanced human intelligence program. Catherine found out, and you couldn't let her expose you." "Margaret knew too, didn't she?" Sarah's voice was quiet but firm. "That's why she died. She was going to tell me the truth." "Margaret was weak," Victoria spat. "She let her emotions cloud her judgment, just like Catherine did, just like you're doing now." Sarah took a step backward, closer to the rose bushes. "No, I'm seeing clearly for the first time in 15 years. Every time I played the piano, every time I worked in this garden, I wasn't just remembering. I was finding my way back to the truth. The marker, Dr. Richards said eagerly, unable to help himself. The way it processes memory and pattern, recognition, it's extraordinary. Even with the suppression treatments, your mind found ways to remember who I am, Sarah finished. To remember what you did to my mother. To remember everything. Victoria moved suddenly, reaching for the box, but Alexander was faster. He stepped between them, his voice cold with fury. It's over, Victoria. These documents, Catherine's journal, Sarah's testimony, it's all going to come out now. You can't prove anything, Victoria snarled. It's been 15 years, evidence disappears, memories fade. Who would believe? She stopped as police sirens became audible in the distance, growing louder by the second. I would, came Mrs. Thompson's voice from the garden path. She held up her phone. I called them the moment I saw what was in that box. I've spent 15 years watching over this garden, watching over Emily's memory. Catherine made me promise that if the truth ever came to light, I would make sure justice was served. As red and blue lights began to flash at the front gates, Victoria's face transformed into something almost feral. She looked at Sarah last time, her voice barely a whisper. You have no idea what you're giving up. The potential of that marker, what you could have become. I know exactly who I am, Sarah replied, moving to stand beside Alexander. I'm Emily Bennett, Catherine Bennett's daughter, and I'm finally home. The sound of police cars pulling up to the mansion echoed through the garden. Dr. Richards slumped in defeat, but Victoria remained straight-backed, defiant to the end. As Mrs. Thompson led the officers through the garden gate, Sarah felt Alexander's hand slip into hers, warm and steady. Your mother would be so proud, he whispered. Sarah squeezed his hand, her other arm still cradling the box of buried truths. The evening light caught the roses around them, turning their petals to gold. Catherine's roses blooming still, keeping their secrets until the right moment, just as she had planned. The days following Victoria's arrest passed in a blur of police statements, media speculation, and emotional revelations. The Bennett mansion, once a silent monument to loss, now hummed with activity as investigators combed through years of buried evidence. Sarah, now officially acknowledged as Emily Bennett, sat in her mother's music room, surrounded by the documents from the buried box. Each page revealed new layers of Victoria's deception, but it was Catherine's letter that held her attention now, her fingers tracing her mother's elegant handwriting. My dearest Emily, if you're reading this, then you've found your way back home, just as I always believed you would. The melody we created together, the roses we tended, these weren't just memories, they were breadcrumbs I scattered along the path, hoping they would lead you back to us one day. There's so much you need to know, so much I should have told you sooner. The genetic marker you carry isn't a curse or a weapon, it's a gift. Your grandmother had it, I had it, and now you do too. It's what gives us our connection to music, our ability to see patterns where others see chaos, our way of understanding the world in deeper, richer ways. Victoria discovered it in my blood work years ago, when we were still partners in the research division. At first I believed in her vision, using our understanding of the marker to help others, to unlock human potential. But then I found the military contracts, the classified experiments, the children they were studying in secret facilities. They wanted to weaponize the marker, to create some kind of cognitive enhancement program for military applications. When I threatened to expose them, Victoria revealed their true plans for you. You weren't just going to be studied, you were going to be their proof of concept, their perfect subject, raised from childhood to demonstrate the marker's full potential. I couldn't let that happen. The night I tried to get you away, I had arranged for us to disappear, to start a new life far from Victoria's influence. I never meant for you to face this burden alone. I never meant to leave you. But know this, my darling girl. Every piece of music I wrote, every rose I planted, every pattern I created in this garden, they were all for you. Messages encoded in a language only we could understand, preserved in the perfect memory that we share. Trust in that memory now. Trust in your father. He never stopped searching for you, never stopped believing, and trust in yourself. The marker doesn't define you. It's simply part of who you are, like your smile, your laugh, your heart. Victoria and her colleagues saw only the potential for power. They never understood that the true gift of the marker isn't in how it enhances our minds, but in how it connects us to the patterns of love and memory that shape our lives. I've hidden copies of all the evidence, the contracts, the research files, everything that proves what they were really doing. Use it to stop them, but don't let it consume you. You are so much more than their failed experiment. You are my daughter, my heart, my most beautiful song. Find the music in everything, my darling. It's always there, waiting to be discovered. Oh, my love, Mom. Emily folded the letter carefully, her vision blurred with tears. Through the music room window, she could see Alexander, her father, talking with the lead investigator, providing more details about Victoria's years of deception. Mrs. Thompson entered quietly, carrying a familiar silver tea tray. "The police have found 3 more facilities," she said softly, setting down the tea. "Children with the marker being studied under the guise of special education programs. They're being reunited with their families now." "How many?" Emily asked, her voice barely a whisper. 17 so far, all with similar stories, identified through routine medical tests, separated from their families through various means, placed in Victoria's care for protection from unnamed threats. Mrs. Thompson's hands trembled slightly as she poured the tea. "Some of them have been there for years." Emily closed her eyes, remembering the fragments of her own experience that had started to resurface. The initial confusion, the fear, the gradual acceptance of a new reality, all carefully orchestrated by Victoria and her team. "She almost succeeded," Emily said, opening her eyes. "If Mother hadn't left those clues, if she hadn't encoded the truth in ways that only I could understand." "Catherine knew exactly what she was doing," Mrs. Thompson smiled gently. "She used their own research against them. They were so focused on the marker's potential for processing information that they never considered how it might preserve emotional memories, maintain connections that run deeper than mere data." A soft chime from Emily's phone interrupted them. Another update from the investigation team. More documents had been found in Victoria's private office, including detailed notes about the night of Catherine's accident. The truth they had all suspected was finally confirmed in Victoria's own handwriting. Emily set the phone down, her hands steady despite the weight of this final confirmation. She walked to the piano, her mother's piano, and sat down, letting her fingers rest on the keys. The melody that had brought her home flowed from her hands, but this time it wasn't just muscle memory or genetic predisposition. It was a conscious choice, a deliberate embracing of who she was and where she came from. Outside, the roses Catherine had planted swayed in the evening breeze, their patterns of growth and bloom following the same mathematical sequences that made music beautiful. Emily smiled, understanding now what her mother had meant in her letter. The patterns were everywhere, waiting to be discovered, in music, in nature, in love, in memory. And in the gentle fall of dusk, as she played her mother's song in her mother's room, Emily Bennett was finally completely home. The autumn morning dawned crisp and clear as Emily stood in her childhood bedroom, now restored to its former warmth. The walls, once covered in generic wallpaper during her absence, now displayed the delicate rose pattern she remembered from her youth. Alexander had found the original design in Catherine's files and had it recreated exactly as it had been. But it was the small upright piano in the corner that held her attention now. Not the grand piano downstairs where everything had started, but her practice piano, the one where she had first learned to play. Alexander had kept it in storage all these years, unable to part with it but too pained to see it. A knock at the door drew her attention. "Come in," she called, smiling as Alexander entered, carrying a small wooden box. "I found something else while going through the storage rooms," he said, setting the box on her desk. "I think it's time you had these back." Emily opened the box to find it filled with sheet music, Her early compositions, written in childish handwriting, but showing the same intuitive understanding of musical patterns that she now knew came from the marker. "I kept everything," Alexander said softly. "Every drawing, every piece of music, every school report. I knew that someday. Somehow." Emily hugged him tightly, still marveling at how natural it felt now, how quickly they had rebuilt their bond once the truth was revealed. The genetic marker might have given her perfect recall, but it was love that had brought her home. "There's something else," Alexander continued, pulling back slightly. "The investigators found Victoria's complete research files. They show that the marker, it continues to evolve throughout a person's life. Your abilities, our understanding of patterns, our connection to music and mathematics, they're not fixed traits. They grow and change as we do." Emily nodded, thinking of how her own abilities had manifested differently over the years. That's why Victoria's experiments were so flawed. She thought she could isolate and weaponize these traits, but they're not separate from who we are. They're part of how we experience the world, how we connect with it. "Exactly," Alexander smiled. "And that's why I want to show you something. Come with me." He led her down to his study, where blueprints were spread across his desk. Emily recognized the layout of one of Victoria's former facilities, a cold, clinical place designed for research and control. "I'm buying it," Alexander explained. "All of them, actually, but we're going to transform them into something else entirely." He pulled out another set of plans, these showing a very different vision: warm, welcoming spaces filled with music rooms, art studios, and gardens. "Schools," Emily breathed, understanding immediately. "Real schools for children with the marker. Places where they can learn to understand and develop their abilities naturally." "Yes," Alexander nodded. "Not hidden away and studied like lab rats, but supported and celebrated for who they are." Catherine's research showed that the marker's true potential isn't in cognitive enhancement or perfect memory. It's in how it allows us to see and understand the connections that exist in everything around us. Emily traced the plans with her finger, seeing how the designs incorporated mathematical patterns, how the gardens were laid out in sequences that echoed musical scales. "Mother would have loved this," she said softly. "She did love it," Alexander replied. "It was her idea originally. I found the concept sketches in her journal, along with notes about how the marker could be nurtured rather than exploited." He paused, watching his daughter carefully. "I was hoping you might help me make it a reality." Emily looked up, surprised. "Me? Who better? You understand both sides of this, the science and the humanity. You've experienced firsthand how the marker can be both a gift and a burden. And, more importantly, you understand what these children need most: acceptance, understanding, and the freedom to discover who they truly are." The morning sun streamed through the study windows, casting patterns of light and shadow across the blueprints. Emily watched how they moved and shifted, creating their own kind of music in light. She thought of the other children Victoria had collected, now free but trying to understand their place in the world. She thought of her mother's letter, urging her to find the music in everything. "Yes," she said finally, decisively. "I'll help, but not just with the schools." She pulled out Catherine's research notes, which she'd been studying extensively since their discovery. Mother's work wasn't finished. She was close to understanding something important about how the marker functions, how it creates these connections we experience. If we could continue her research, ethically, openly, with the goal of understanding rather than controlling. Alexander smiled, seeing Catherine's passionate curiosity reflected in their daughter's eyes. "Where do we start?" Emily walked to the window, looking out at the rose garden where so many truths had been buried and found again. The morning light caught the dewdrops on the petals, each one reflecting and refracting the world in its own unique pattern. "We start with the music," she said softly. "We start with the patterns. We start with love." She turned back to her father, her eyes bright with purpose. "We start by showing the world that what makes us different isn't something to be weaponized or controlled. It's something to be understood and celebrated." She sat at the small desk that had been placed in the study for her, pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, and began to write. The patterns flowed from her mind to the page, not just musical notes this time, but a fuller vision, a plan for something new and beautiful, growing from the ashes of Victoria's failed ambitions. And in the garden below, Catherine's roses continued, their eternal dance with the sun, their patterns a testament to the truth that Emily had finally embraced. Some gifts aren't meant to be contained or controlled. They're meant to bloom. 6 months had passed since Victoria's arrest, and the former research facility in upstate New York had undergone a remarkable transformation. Where sterile corridors once echoed with clinical silence, music now flowed freely through warmly lit hallways. The Bennett Institute for Creative Development was coming to life. Emily stood in what had once been the main testing laboratory, now converted into a light-filled conservatory. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over gardens designed in the same pattern as her mother's rose sanctuary. Inside, 12 pianos were arranged in a spiral pattern that would have seemed random to most observers, but Emily knew better. The arrangement followed the same mathematical sequence found in the growth patterns of Catherine's roses. "Miss Bennett," a small voice called from the doorway. 10-year-old Lily Chen, one of the first students enrolled in the Institute's pilot program, stood there clutching sheet music to her chest. Like Emily, like all the children now finding their way to the Institute, Lily carried the marker in her jeans. "Come in, Lily," Emily smiled, patting the piano bench beside her. "Show me what you've been working on." The young girl sat down, her fingers immediately finding their place on the keys. The melody that flowed from her hands was complex, intricate, far beyond what most would expect from a child her age. But Emily understood. The marker didn't just enhance memory or cognitive processing, it created a unique way of understanding and interpreting patterns, whether in music, mathematics, or nature itself. "It's beautiful," Emily said when Lily finished playing. "Did you compose this yourself?" Lily nodded shyly. "It's how I see the garden, each flower, each leaf, they make their own kind of music. I just write down what I hear." Emily felt tears prick at her eyes, remembering how she used to tell her mother the same thing. Catherine had understood, had nurtured that ability to see music in everything. Now Emily was doing the same for a new generation. "Would you like to learn something special?" Emily asked, reaching into her folder. "Something my mother wrote." Lily's eyes widened as Emily placed Catherine's unfinished composition on the music stand. "But isn't this the one you've been trying to complete?" "It is," Emily nodded. "And I think I finally understand why she left it unfinished. She was leaving space for something or someone else to complete the pattern." As they began to play together, Emily felt the familiar warmth of the marker's gift flowing through her consciousness. She could see the mathematical structures underlying the melody, the way each note connected to create something larger than itself. But now she also saw something new, how Lily's interpretation added fresh dimensions to the pattern, how their different perspectives combined to create something neither could have achieved alone. A knock at the door interrupted their session. Alexander stood there, his face alight with excitement. "Emily, they're here, the first group from Victoria's other facilities." Emily squeezed Lily's shoulder gently. "Keep practicing. We'll work more on this tomorrow." Following her father through the Institute's winding corridors, Emily's mind raced with possibilities. Each child they had rescued from Victoria's program brought new insights into how the marker manifested, how it could be nurtured rather than exploited. They reached the main entrance just as a bus was pulling up. One by one, children of various ages began to descend the steps, each carrying small bags containing their few possessions. Their faces showed a mixture of uncertainty and hope, the same expression Emily had worn when she first returned home. "Welcome to the Bennett Institute," she said warmly, stepping forward to greet them. "I'm Emily, and I know exactly what you've been through, because I've been there too." A small boy near the front looked up at her with curious eyes. They said we're special, that we can do things others can't." Emily knelt down to his level. "We are special," she agreed, "but not in the way they told you. Our gift isn't about being better or stronger or smarter. It's about seeing the world differently, understanding connections that others might miss." She led the group into the conservatory. where Lily was still playing Catherine's composition. The new arrivals instinctively moved closer to the music, their faces showing the same recognition Emily had felt when she first heard the melody again, after 15 years. "Each of you has your own music inside you," she continued. "Your own way of seeing patterns and making connections. Here we won't try to control those gifts or use them for someone else's purpose. Instead, we'll help you understand them, develop them, and use them in whatever way feels right to you." Alexander watched from the doorway, his heart full as he observed his daughter with the children. She had inherited more than just Catherine's marker. She had inherited her compassion, her understanding of how to nurture rather than exploit these special gifts. Later that evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, Emily sat at her mother's piano in the mansion. The day's events had left her emotionally drained but deeply fulfilled. As her fingers found their place on the keys, she began to play, not Catherine's unfinished composition this time, but something new, something that incorporated elements of her mother's style while adding her own voice, her own understanding of the patterns that connected everything. Through the window, she could see the roses swaying gently in the evening breeze, their movements synchronized with her music in ways that only she and others like her could fully appreciate. The marker wasn't a weapon or a tool for advancement as Victoria had believed. It was a gift of perception, a different way of experiencing and connecting with the world's inherent beauty. And as the last notes of her new composition faded into the gathering darkness, Emily smiled, knowing that somewhere Catherine was smiling too. The autumn wind rustled through the courtroom as Victoria Blackwood stood to hear her sentence. The trial had lasted 3 weeks, bringing to light decades of manipulation, exploitation, and carefully orchestrated deception. Emily sat in the gallery between Alexander and Mrs. Thompson, her face composed, but her hands tightly clasped in her lap. "The defendant will rise," the judge intoned, her voice carrying authority through the hushed chamber. Victoria rose, her steel-gray hair now showing streaks of white, her designer suit replaced by something more subdued. But her eyes still held that same calculating look, even now, even here. The judge's words were clear and unequivocal. 25 years for conspiracy, kidnapping, and the orchestrated accident that had taken Catherine's life. Additional charges were pending as more evidence emerged from the other facilities. As the guards led Victoria away, she turned slightly, her eyes meeting Emily's for a brief moment. There was something there, not quite regret, but perhaps a glimmer of understanding. She had spent years studying the marker, trying to quantify and control it, never realizing that its true power lay in something she couldn't measure or manipulate, the connections it created between hearts and minds. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered with their microphones and cameras, eager for statements. Alexander moved to shield Emily from their questions, but she touched his arm gently. "It's all right," she said. "They need to hear this, all of it." Stepping forward, Emily faced the cameras with quiet confidence. "Today isn't about punishment or revenge," she began. "It's about recognition. Recognition that every human being, whether they carry the marker or not, has the right to develop their gifts in their own way, free from exploitation or control." She spoke about the Bennett Institute, about how they were transforming Victoria's former facilities into places of learning and growth. She described their research into the marker, conducted openly and ethically, with the goal of understanding rather than weaponizing its potential. "We're not hiding anymore," she concluded. "We're not running or pretending to be something we're not. The children at our institute are learning to embrace their unique way of seeing the world, just as I had to relearn who I truly was." Back at the mansion that evening, Emily sat with Alexander in Catherine's garden. The roses were preparing for winter, their blooms fading but their patterns still visible in the arrangement of stems and leaves. "I found something interesting in Mother's research notes," Emily said, pulling out her tablet. She wasn't just studying the marker itself. She was studying how it manifests differently in each person who carries it. It's not just about enhanced memory or pattern recognition. It's about how those abilities shape our individual ways of understanding and connecting with the world. Alexander leaned forward, interested. What do you mean? Look at Lily, for example. She doesn't just see musical patterns, she sees them specifically in nature, translating the growth patterns of plants into melodies. Another student at the Institute marker sees them in numbers, creating beautiful mathematical proofs that look like works of art. And she paused, smiling softly. I see them everywhere, but especially in the connections between people. Like mother, like daughter, Alexander murmured. Emily nodded. That's why Victoria's approach was fundamentally flawed. She thought the marker could be standardized, controlled, directed toward specific purposes, but it's more like a unique lens through which each person sees the world differently. She pulled up Catherine's final research notes on her tablet. Mother was working on a theory that the marker doesn't enhance cognitive function in a linear way. Instead, it creates new neural pathways, allowing the brain to process information in patterns that most people can't perceive. But how those patterns manifest, that's unique to each individual. And that's what you're exploring at the Institute? Yes, Emily said enthusiastically. We're not trying to channel the children's abilities in any particular direction. Instead, we're helping them discover and develop their own unique ways of seeing and understanding. Some will express it through music, others through mathematics or art or science. The possibilities are endless. A cool breeze stirred the garden, carrying the sweet scent of the late roses. Emily closed her eyes, feeling the patterns in the air currents, in the gentle swaying of the branches, in the steady beating of her own heart. When she opened them again, she found Alexander watching her with a mixture of pride and wonder. Your mother would be so proud, he said softly, not just of what you're doing with the Institute, but of who you've become. Emily reached for his hand, feeling the patterns of connection that bound them together, father and daughter, past and present, loss and recovery. We're creating something beautiful from all of this, she said. Something that honors her memory while looking toward the future. As the sun set behind the mansion, casting long shadows across the garden, Emily thought about all the children at the Institute, each discovering their own unique way of seeing and understanding the world. Victoria had sought to control and direct the marker's power, never understanding that its true strength lay in its diversity, in the infinite variations of perception and connection it created. The evening air filled with the sound of piano, music drifting from the Institute's conservatory. Lily practicing Catherine's composition, adding her own interpretations to the unfinished melody. Emily smiled, hearing how the young girl's understanding of natural patterns influenced her playing, creating something both familiar and entirely new. Here, in this moment, surrounded by her mother's roses and the echoes of her music, Emily felt the full circle of their story completing itself, not ending but transforming, like the patterns they all saw and understood in their own unique ways, endless in their variations, beautiful in their complexity. Winter had settled over the Bennett Institute, transforming the gardens into a crystalline wonderland. Emily stood at her office window, watching snowflakes create their own mathematical patterns as they drifted past. The Institute had been open for 8 months now, and each day brought new discoveries about the marker and its manifestations. Knock at her door interrupted her contemplation. Dr. Sarah Chen, Lily's mother, and the Institute's newly appointed research director, entered with a stack of papers. Emily, you need to see this, she said, spreading the documents across the desk. We've been analyzing the genetic sequencing data from all our students, comparing it with your mother's original research, and we found something extraordinary. Emily leaned forward, studying the complex charts and diagrams. Her ability to perceive patterns allowed her to quickly grasp what others might have missed. The marker isn't static, she breathed. It's adapting. Exactly, Dr. Chen nodded enthusiastically. Each person's marker responds to their individual experiences, creating unique neural pathways based on how they interact with the world. It's not just about inherited traits, it's about how those traits evolve and develop over time. Emily's mind raced with the implications. That's why Victoria's attempts to standardize and control it never worked. The marker isn't a fixed enhancement, it's more like an instrument that each person learns to play in their own way. And there's more, Dr. Chen continued, pulling out another set of documents. Remember those old files we found in Victoria's archive? The ones about other families with the marker? Well, we've been reaching out to them quietly, and the responses have been fascinating. She laid out a map marked with dozens of points, each representing a family that carried the marker. It's not as rare as Victoria thought. She was just looking for specific manifestations, enhanced memory, mathematical ability, musical talent. But there are people out there with the marker who express it in completely different ways. A commotion in the hallway drew their attention. Lily burst into the office, her eyes bright with excitement. "Miss Bennet, you have to come to the music room. Marcus figured something out about your mother's composition." Emily and Dr. Chen followed the eager child to the Institute's main conservatory. Marcus, a 13-year-old mathematical prodigy, sat at the piano with several sheets of paper covered in complex equations spread before him. "Look," he said as they entered, pointing to his calculations. "The unfinished parts of your mother's composition, they're not really unfinished. They're variables in an equation. She wrote the music so that it could be completed in multiple ways, each one mathematically perfect, but emotionally different, depending on how you solve the variables." Emily sat down at the piano, her heart racing. "Show me." Marcus pointed to different sections of the score, explaining how each unfinished phrase could be resolved through various mathematical progressions. "It's like she created a musical algorithm, but one that requires emotional input to solve. The mathematics are perfect, but the final choice of notes depends on the player's own interpretation of the patterns." Emily's fingers touched the keys, and she began to play, following Marcus's calculations but letting her own emotional understanding guide the resolution of each phrase. The melody that emerged was hauntingly beautiful, recognizably Catherine's composition, but with something new, something personal added to it. "She left it unfinished on purpose," Emily whispered, tears in her eyes. "Not because she ran out of time, but because she wanted each person who played it to find their own way to complete it. It's not just a song, it's a demonstration of how the marker works, how it allows each of us to see and interpret patterns in our own unique way." Dr. Chen was scribbling notes furiously. "This could be the key to understanding how the marker adapts and evolves. If we could map the different ways people complete this composition against their unique manifestations of the marker, we could finally understand what Mother was trying to prove," Emily finished. "That the marker isn't about enhancement or superiority. It's about diversity of perception, about finding new ways to understand and connect with the world around us." She looked around the room at the small gathering that had formed. Dr. Chen with her scientific curiosity, Marcus with his mathematical insights, Lily with her intuitive understanding of natural patterns, and all the other students and staff who had been drawn by the music. Each of them carried the marker, and each expressed it in their own unique way. "This is what Mother was protecting," Emily said softly. "Not just the marker itself, but the infinite possibilities it represents. Victoria wanted to standardize it, control it, turn it into a weapon. But Mother understood that its true power lies in its diversity, in the way it allows each person to discover their own unique way of seeing and understanding the world." As the winter sun cast long shadows through the conservatory windows, Emily began to play the composition again, this time inviting the others to join in, each adding their own interpretation to the unfinished phrases. The resulting symphony was complex, beautiful, and entirely unique, a perfect expression of what the marker truly meant. And somewhere in the patterns of light and shadow, in the mathematics of the music, in the connections being forged between these remarkable individuals, Emily felt her mother's presence, guiding them toward a future she had always believed in. Spring came early to the Bennett Institute, bringing with it an unexpected visitor. Dr. Richards, recently released after cooperating with the investigation, had requested a meeting with Emily. She received him in the garden pavilion, where the first roses of the season were beginning to bloom. "You've created something remarkable here," he said, looking around at the transformed facility. something I wish we had understood was possible years ago. Emily studied the man who had once helped orchestrate her separation from her family. Age and regret had softened his features, but his eyes still held the keen intelligence that had made him such a valuable part of Victoria's team. "Why did you ask to see me?" she inquired quietly. "Because I owe you the truth," he replied, pulling a worn notebook from his bag. "Not just about what we did, but about what we discovered, what your mother discovered, that frightened Victoria so much she was willing to go to any lengths to suppress it." He opened the notebook, revealing pages of detailed research notes. Catherine's final studies weren't just about the marker's genetic properties. She was investigating something far more profound: the marker's ability to create connections between people who carry it. Emily leaned forward, intrigued despite herself. What kind of connections? Emotional resonance, shared perception patterns, unconscious synchronization of thought processes. She called it harmonic convergence, the way people with the marker naturally attune to each other's emotional and cognitive frequencies. He gestured to the Institute's buildings, visible through the pavilion windows. "It's happening here, isn't it? You've seen it among the students." Emily thought about the remarkable way her students seemed to understand each other, how they could collaborate on complex projects with minimal verbal communication, how they instinctively supported and complemented each other's unique expressions of the marker. Victoria saw it as a threat, Dr. Richards continued. She was building a program based on individual enhancement, on creating superior isolated operators. The idea that the marker's true power might lie in connection rather than separation, it undermined everything she had planned. "And that's why Mother had to be silenced," Emily said softly, "because she discovered that the marker wasn't about making individuals stronger, it was about making us more connected." "Yes," Dr. Richards's voice was heavy with remorse. Catherine's research suggested that the marker's enhancement of pattern recognition and cognitive processing wasn't its primary function. Those were just side effects of its true purpose: to create deeper, more complex ways of understanding and connecting with others who share the gift. He handed her the notebook. "This contains everything: Catherine's complete research, my own observations over the years, and something else you need to see." He turned to the final pages, revealing a series of musical notations. These were, in Catherine's personal effects, but Victoria kept them hidden. They're variations on the unfinished composition, not completions, but possible pathways, each designed to resonate with different emotional and cognitive patterns. Emily's fingers traced the familiar handwriting. She wasn't just leaving it unfinished for artistic reasons. She was creating a template for connection, a way for people with the marker to explore and express their unique perceptions while still maintaining harmony with others. "Exactly," Dr. Richards nodded, "and there's more." Catherine believed that the marker's ability to create these connections wasn't limited to direct interaction. She theorized that people with the marker could create lasting emotional and cognitive imprints through music, art, mathematics, any form of pattern-based expression. That's why you were able to find your way back home. The patterns she left behind weren't just clues. They were emotional anchors designed to resonate specifically with your unique expression of the marker. Emily stood and walked to the piano in the pavilion. Her fingers found the keys, beginning to play one of the variations Catherine had written. As the music filled the space, she could feel the truth of what Dr. Richards was saying. The composition wasn't just a piece of music, it was a bridge between minds, a way of sharing perception and understanding across time and space. Through the windows, she could see her students in the garden, each engaged in their own activities, but moving in unconscious harmony with each other. Lily was sketching the mathematical patterns she saw in the flower beds while Marcus explained a complex theorem to younger students, his hand movements unconsciously matching the rhythm of a nearby student's piano practice. "We're not just teaching them to use their abilities," Emily realized. "We're teaching them to create connections, to build networks of understanding that go beyond traditional communication." "That's what Victoria never understood," Dr. Richards said quietly. She saw the marker as a tool for creating exceptional individuals. Catherine saw it as a means of creating exceptional communities. As if to emphasize his point, a subtle shift in the garden caught Emily's attention. Without any visible signal, her students had begun to gather near the rose bushes, drawn by some shared intuition. They moved with unconscious grace, arranging themselves in a pattern that exactly matched the mathematical structure of Catherine's composition. "Mother knew," Emily whispered, watching the scene unfold. She knew that the true power of the marker wasn't in what it could do for any one person, but in what it could help us create together. The setting sun painted the garden in shades of gold, illuminating the gathered students and casting long shadows that formed their own intricate patterns across the ground. In that moment, Emily could see the full scope of her mother's vision. Not a world of enhanced individuals competing for supremacy, but a symphony of unique perspectives coming together to create something greater than the sum of its parts. And in the gentle evening breeze, carried on the scent of blooming roses, she felt her mother's presence more strongly than ever, guiding them all toward a future where connection, not competition, would be the key to unlocking humanity's true potential. 1 year had passed since the Bennett Institute opened its doors. The transformed facility now stood as a beacon of hope and understanding, its gardens in full bloom under the warm summer sun. Emily sat in her mother's study, now her own, reviewing applications from families around the world who had recognized the marker in their children and were seeking guidance rather than suppression. A gentle knock drew her attention. Alexander entered carrying a familiar-looking file folder. "The last of Victoria's records," he said, placing the folder on her desk. The investigators finally cleared them for release. Emily opened the folder carefully, her trained eye quickly picking up patterns in the seemingly random collection of documents. Most were administrative files, financial records, and research notes they'd already seen. But one document caught her attention, a letter Victoria had written but never sent, dated just days before Emily's disappearance 15 years ago. "My dearest friend," it began, addressed to Catherine, "I fear by the time you read this, our paths will have diverged beyond reconciliation. Your latest research threatens everything we've worked for. This idea of harmonic convergence between marker carriers, it will destroy the program we've built. The military contracts, the private funding, all of it depends on our ability to create controllable, predictable enhancements. If word gets out that the marker's true potential lies in connection rather than individual superiority, everything falls apart." Emily's hands trembled slightly as she continued reading. "Your daughter's abilities are developing faster than any subject we've studied. The way she naturally forms connections with others, the way she sees patterns not just in music or mathematics, but in human relationships themselves. She's living proof of your theory, and that makes her dangerous. I cannot allow your research to continue. I cannot allow Emily to develop these abilities further. By the time you read this, she will be safe, protected from those who would exploit her gifts, but also prevented from revealing the truth about what the marker really means. Forgive me, old friend, but I do what I must to protect our work." Alexander watched as Emily processed the revelation. "She truly believed she was protecting you," he said softly. "No," Emily shook her head. "She was protecting herself, her vision of what the marker should be. Mother saw the truth, that our gifts weren't meant to separate us from others, but to bring us together in new and deeper ways." She stood and walked to the window, looking out over the Institute's grounds. Students moved through the gardens, in small groups, their interactions flowing with a natural harmony that went beyond normal social dynamics. It was exactly what Catherine had described in her research, the marker's ability to create deeper, more intuitive connections between people. "Dr. Chen's latest research confirms everything Mother theorized," Emily said. "The marker doesn't just enhance individual abilities. It creates networks of understanding between people who carry it. Each person's unique way of seeing patterns complements and enhances the others. It's like a symphony where each instrument plays its own melody, but together they create something far more beautiful than any could achieve alone." A sudden burst of laughter from the gardens drew their attention. Lily and Marcus had gathered a group of younger students around the central fountain, demonstrating how the water's spray created patterns that could be translated into both music and mathematics. The children watched in wonder as Marcus wrote equations in his notebook, while Lily played corresponding melodies on a portable keyboard. The two activities perfectly synchronized despite their apparent differences. That's what Victoria never understood, Emily continued. She saw these abilities as tools to be controlled and directed, but they're more like different languages for describing the same underlying reality. Some of us see it in music, others in mathematics or art or nature. But we're all perceiving the same fundamental patterns. She picked up her mother's journal, which now sat permanently on her desk. Mother knew that the real power of the marker wasn't in creating exceptional individuals, but in helping us understand how everything and everyone is connected. The eye, enhanced abilities, the pattern recognition. Those are just different ways of perceiving and expressing those connections. Alexander moved to stand beside her at the window. And that's what makes the Institute different from Victoria's program. You're not trying to control or direct these abilities. You're creating a space where they can develop naturally, where each person can discover their own unique way of understanding and connecting with the world. Emily nodded, watching as more students gravitated toward the fountain, each adding their own perspective to the impromptu lesson. A young artist began sketching the water patterns, while another student used dance to express the mathematical rhythms Marcus had discovered. It was a perfect demonstration of what Catherine had called harmonic convergence, different perceptions and expressions flowing together in natural harmony. "We're doing more than just teaching them to use their abilities," Emily said softly. "We're teaching them to understand and celebrate their differences, to see how their unique perspectives can combine, to create something greater than any individual could achieve alone." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the Institute's grounds, the sound of piano music drifted up from the conservatory. Someone had begun playing Catherine's composition, and others were joining in, each adding their own interpretations to the unfinished phrases. The resulting melody was complex yet harmonious, a perfect expression of unity in diversity. Emily smiled, feeling her mother's presence in every note, in every pattern, in every connection being forged between these remarkable individuals. Victoria had tried to control and direct these gifts, but Catherine had understood their true nature. They weren't meant to be contained or standardized, but to flow freely, creating ever-expanding networks of understanding and connection. And in the growing twilight, as the music swelled and the patterns danced in the fading light, Emily knew that they were finally achieving what her mother had envisioned, a world where differences were celebrated, where unique perspectives combined, to create new understanding, and where the truest expression of their gifts lay not in individual achievement, but in the beautiful symphony of connection they created together. The day of the Bennett Institute's first anniversary celebration dawned bright and clear. The gardens, now in full summer glory, had been arranged to accommodate hundreds of visitors, families of students, researchers, educators, and others, interested in their groundbreaking approach to understanding and developing the marker's gifts. Emily stood in her mother's rose garden, making final adjustments to the central display. Catherine's original roses had been carefully propagated, and now their descendants bloomed throughout the Institute's grounds, their patterns echoing the mathematical structures found in her music. "Everything's ready," Mrs. Thompson said, approaching with her usual quiet efficiency. "The guests will be arriving soon." Emily nodded, touching a perfect bloom with gentle fingers. "I wish she could see this," she said softly. "All of it. The Institute, the students, the way her research is finally being understood and appreciated. She does see it," Mrs. Thompson smiled. "Through you, through every child who discovers their gifts here, through every new connection that's formed, her vision lives in everything you've created." The sound of arriving vehicles drew their attention. The first guests were beginning to arrive, families from around the world, each with their own stories of discovery, confusion, and finally understanding. Emily watched as children with the marker instinctively began to form connections, their unique perceptions harmonizing in ways that confirmed everything Catherine had theorized. Alexander joined them, looking distinguished in his suit, but with an underlying excitement that made him seem younger. "The auditorium is prepared for your presentation," he said, "though I suspect it won't go quite as formally as planned." Emily laughed, knowing he was right. Their community had a way of transforming planned events into organic expressions of connection and creativity. It was one of the many ways the marker manifested, this ability to create spontaneous harmony out of apparent chaos. As they made their way to the main building, Emily saw Lily and Marcus gathering their fellow students. Over the past year, these two had become living proof of Catherine's theories about harmonic convergence. Their different ways of perceiving patterns, Lily through music and nature, Marcus through mathematics, had combined to create new insights that neither could have achieved alone. The auditorium filled quickly, but there was none of the usual pre-presentation tension. Instead, the space hummed with a kind of harmonious energy, as people with the marker naturally adjusted to each other's presence, creating an atmosphere of shared understanding that transcended normal social interactions. Emily took her place at the podium, but instead of beginning her prepared speech, she found herself drawn to the piano that had been placed on stage. Her fingers touched the keys, beginning to play Catherine's composition, not the original version, but the harmonically expanded form that had evolved through countless interpretations by the Institute's students and staff. One by one, other instruments joined in, Lily with her violin, Marcus adding rhythm with mathematical precision on a synthesizer, other students contributing their own unique interpretations. The music filled the space, but it was more than just sound. It was a demonstration of everything they had learned about the marker's true nature. As the melody reached the traditionally unfinished sections, something remarkable happened. Without any prior planning, members of the audience began to contribute. Some through music, others through movement, still others through spontaneous visual art or mathematical equations. Each contribution was unique, yet all flowed together in perfect harmony. Emily let her hands fall from the keys, watching in wonder, as Catherine's composition transformed into something entirely new, yet fundamentally true to its original nature. This was what her mother had tried to explain, the marker's ability to create networks of understanding that transcended individual perception. When the impromptu performance finally ended, there was a moment of profound silence. Then Alexander stood, his eyes bright with tears of joy and understanding. "This," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the quiet auditorium, "this is what Catherine saw. Not just individual gifts to be developed or abilities to be enhanced, but a new way of connecting, of understanding, of creating together." Emily returned to the podium, her heart full. "My mother believed that the marker wasn't meant to separate us from others or make us superior," she began. "She believed it was meant to help us understand the connections that already exist between all things and all people. Each of us perceives these connections differently, through music, mathematics, art, nature, or countless other ways. But when we come together, when we share our unique perspectives, we create something far more beautiful and profound than any of us could achieve alone." She gestured to the students, the families, the researchers and educators who had gathered to celebrate their first year. "This institute isn't just a school or a research facility. It's a community, a place where different ways of seeing and understanding the world can come together in harmony. We don't teach our students to conform to a single way of using their gifts. We help them discover their own unique perspectives while learning to connect and create with others." Looking out over the audience, Emily could see the patterns of connection flowing between people, the subtle harmonies of shared understanding that Catherine had first identified. Victoria had tried to control these connections, to direct them toward her own purposes. But like the roses in the garden, like the music that filled their halls, these gifts couldn't be contained or controlled. They could only be nurtured, allowed to grow and bloom in their own unique ways. "This is just the beginning," she concluded, feeling the truth of her words resonate through the connected consciousness of the gathering. Every day, we discover new ways that the marker manifests, new patterns of connection and understanding. But the most important thing we've learned is this: our greatest strength lies not in our individual abilities, but in the symphony we create together." As she spoke these final words, the music began again, spontaneously, beautifully, a harmony of different perspectives and perceptions flowing together in perfect balance. And in that moment, Emily felt her mother's presence